Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Happy Monday. Just checking all of our systems here, make sure everything's working.
We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. If you are watching, you are joining us for the 2023 contract changes forms class.
Kind of.
The abbreviated
this is abbreviated.
version.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, this will be
It's a bird's eye view of everything.
Yeah. There's not a ton of things that got changed.
No.
But some important ones. And then we'll go maybe a little more in depth during the annual update, which will be, do we have the date?
Yeah, we are going to be holding the annual update commission course on January 17th.
And that'll be at Smedra, and it will be free.
Yeah.
And I will be teaching that.
Yes. So we'll get that announced, and the registration link will actually go out today in the weekly update email. So you can go ahead and start signing up for that class. And yeah, we'll dive a lot more into the contracts at that point. But there's a couple important modifications that we want you guys knowing as the year winds down. All right, everything seemed to be working okay.
There we go. Comments on. Good morning. We've got Vicky Hofer. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning.
And Kiefer.
Yeah, we've got quite a few people logging on. Give us a shout out in the comment section below. All right, 10 o'clock. Let's jump in.
10 o'clock. Morning, Amy. All right. Do we want to just go straight to your form?
Yeah.
All right.
So this morning I did post a copy of the PDF.
Sorry about this. I'm going to share it on Zoom. That way, when I'm recording this, it shows up on Zoom.
Ah, perfect.
So
if you guys want to follow along to the PDF presentation that will be going slide by slide, I did upload that to the Equity Private Facebook page this morning, about an hour ago. You can download that PDF bundle. You're more than happy to follow along on camera or on screen, but if you want to have those PDFs to reflect afterwards, or you'd rather pull them up on the device that you're watching on, you can download from the Facebook page. Dora website has all of the red line and clean versions of the contracts for educational purposes. If you log onto their website, you'll see I circled in red broker contract forms. All you do is click on that, and then it will take you to another page that shows the 10 form revisions, as well as the one new form for 2023, which is what we'll be referencing this morning. So here you get to see the red line and clean versions. There are some property management forms that had updates. We're not going to focus on tenant listing agreements, landlord listing agreements. We're going to be looking at contracts for residential purchases. So we'll be talking about the buyer listing contract, the seller listing contract, the seller's property disclosure, the commercial, land, and residential all had updates. We're going to talk about the residential form just because that applies to most transactions. And then we're going to talk about the lease assignment, which is a brand new form. So fortunately, the contract to buy and sell doesn't change every year. It's on a 2-year cycle. So last year we got a new contract to buy and sell. So this year nothing will change. 2 years ago or a year ago, we got the exclusive right to sell listing contract and the buyer's agency, both changed, and now we're seeing new modifications to those. So fortunately, our CBS is staying the same. You do not have to learn a new one of those. As Todd mentioned previously, there are not a ton of changes to this. There are a couple that we're going to point out that we think are important, but really they made a couple changes with a couple words, removing an and, adding a however, taking out a comma. But if you scroll down to section 5.8, the first revision that they made of any substance is something that we've already been doing, but they actually wanted to memorialize in writing. So if a broker wishes to disclose the terms of any offer, broker must first obtain the seller's written consent. We've been doing that for years, but it's kind of nice to put that in writing so that if you're going to share anything about the offers that you currently have in on the property, the seller knows that you're doing so. I think the biggest change that we have that I'm really excited about is
this is
under
a great one.
section 7.1, the compensation.
So you guys know that we put in the weekly update probably every other month, clarification on 7.1, because this just really was getting messed up. So what it used to say is the compensation that you are going to pay for a co-op broker, whether they be a transaction broker or whether they be represented as a buyer agent. For the co-op.
Yeah, for the other broker on the other side.
Somehow we always were getting that confused with maybe how you're going to get paid in the event that you're a transaction broker or you're representing a buyer. And it wasn't, you weren't looking at it the co-op. Cleaned it up, just cleaned it up. So now 7.1, I'll just read it. In consideration of services to be performed by the broker, seller agrees to pay brokerage firm as follows. So this is the firm, you, the total. Sale commission, this is where you would put the full commission, 6%, 7%, 5.6, whatever the full commission is. Brokerage firm agrees to contribute from the sale commission to outside firm commission, used to say co-op. So how much are you going to pay the other agent? Percentage right there. No longer the transaction buyer.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how the buyer is being represented. They are getting paid the same amount regardless.
So very simple. The first percentage is the total. The next percentage is what you would pay a co-op or another brokerage firm. When you subtract the co-op firm from the total, that is what you're getting paid. Love it. Simple.
Yeah, it's super simple. So we'll probably see MLS systems follow suit with removing the buyer agent and transaction broker percentages when you enter in a listing, just because we no longer have those fields in our listing contract. And then in the event that you are going to reduce your commission, should you double end the transaction, you don't do anything in section 7, you put that in the additional provision. So nice and easy.
Yeah.
We love that change.
If you have any questions, if you see me going back and forth, I'm looking over here on the other computer, your comments. So if you have a comment, stop us. We'll help you out.
We'll definitely keep an eye on the questions because we do want this to be interactive as we go along. So another change that they made, just a really small one, is in section 11.8 under the Colorado withholding. They just added in, if the seller's not exempt, then the Colorado Department of Revenue may require that a portion of the seller's proceeds be withheld from closing. So not a significant change, but something to be mindful of. To match up with the new contract to buy and sell, we've now added in the encumbered inclusions and the personal property conveyance. That was just merely so that things match up with the CBS that we've been using for the last year. So section 13.1.4 and 13.1.5. As we continue down, the only modification that was made to the seller's property disclosure section, 18.2.1, is that if the seller agrees or does not agree, we now have on or before the sale contract's respective deadline. So whatever the property disclosure deadline is on your date and deadline chart is when that property disclosure form needs to be provided. So they just added that in for clarification. Another fairly significant change is under section 19. So what our current contract has is the right to cancel if the broker wants to cancel or the seller wants to cancel the contract. And it lists out a few different paragraphs of what that looks like. They decided to modify that and add in a default clause. Well, yeah, if the seller wants to cancel or the broker wants to cancel, but what happens if someone's in default? So now we have, if broker's in default, in the event that the broker fails to substantially perform under the seller listing contract, the seller has the right to cancel the seller listing contract, including all rights of the brokerage firm to any compensation. Any rights of the seller to damages, if any, that accrued prior to the cancellation will survive such cancellation. And if the seller's in default, similar language. What stayed the same, but now has a subcategory, is the additional rights of the brokerage firm to cancel. So under 19.3, we had this language in our current contract, but it's now under the brokerage firm rather than the broker section. So we kind of have a 3-tiered paragraph now, and it allows the brokerage firm to cancel in the event that there's something wrong with the physical condition of the property that is going to prohibit them from selling the home. So the brokerage firm still has the right to cancel the contract for things of that nature.
And this does not state, though, what it is that you defaulted on, what the terms are, what the compensation would be. So it doesn't answer those questions.
Yeah, it's a little bit fuzzy. If we scroll back up to section 10, it outlines what the seller's obligations are to the broker. And so if the seller defaults on any of those obligations, then in theory, that's how the broker is allowed to cancel the contract. So we're talking about things like negotiation and communication, the ability to advertise the property, whether the seller is party to another contract with another agent or not, whether they have submitted prospects with another realtor. So if they're in breach of any of those items, then the broker has the right to cancel. But again, it's not very clearly defined what falls within default and what doesn't.
Nor what you'll receive.
Yeah.
So those are things that could be added into your agreement in the event that they cancel a transaction, or an event that they back out of the deal. Are you going to get compensated for some of the marketing things that you've paid for? So kind of opens up more negotiations.
Yeah, and what
upfront.
Damian Cox of Cox Law Firm mentioned when he talked about this section in a recent webinar that he did is it really gives the broker more teeth when they have a buyer that cheats on them. And those were his exact words. This is more of a broker advantageous clause than it is a seller or a buyer advantageous clause. So
Crystal had a question. She said, is the wording the same that a buyer will pay the agent's commission if they end up buying a FSBO and the seller doesn't pay the buyer's agent commission? So that's the different contract. This is
our listing
agreement to sell.
Yeah. In the buyer agency agreement, that is going to be the same. Yeah. And we'll hit upon that because that's the next contract that we'll discuss. But yes, in the event that the buyer chooses a for sale by owner and the for sale by owner is not offering compensation, then you do get paid by the buyer. And that did all stay the same.
And I didn't see that Wendy.
So good question. Yeah. Thank you, Crystal.
Wendy said 19.1 seems very ambiguous.
Yes, it does.
It just says that you have the right for defaults, but it doesn't say what that means.
Yeah.
So we can't solve all problems in a contract up front.
No. All right. So under section 24, the non-discrimination paragraph did change a little bit. Military status and hairstyle and texture are now a protected class. So that got added in, as well as a line that says the seller understands and agrees that the broker may not violate federal, state, or local fair housing laws. So military status, hairstyle, and texture, protected classes.
And nor should the seller violate.
Yes.
I think that's interesting. The broker may not violate, but fair housing applies to everyone, not just licensees. Sometimes people do think fair housing is a licensee thing. It's a people thing. It applies to all. Yeah, non-discrimination.
And that was it for the seller listing agreement. I mean, not a ton of changes, but that commission section.
The commission section, I am the most happy. Is this fuzzy or not in focus? I don't know.
It might be because we're scrolling through. It could change the focus. Again, I did upload this PDF packet to the Facebook group. So in the event that you want to download that to your computer and follow along, you could do that as well.
And we've got people saying in focus.
Okay.
Well, I do wear glasses, so maybe it's time to update. Thanks, guys. Lots of people saying it looks good. Appreciate
Awesome.
Greg, Katie, Aaron.
Perfect. All right. So let's talk about the exclusive right to buy listing contract. This had even fewer changes than the exclusive right to sell. So.
And then I don't think you said at the very beginning, this is not the actual red line.
No, this is the clean version of the contract. The red line can kind of be a bit distracting when I'm trying to teach a class or we're trying to teach a class. So I downloaded the clean forms. If you want to go to the door website, you can download the red line forms, which shows the scratched out marks of every single modification that was made.
But that's like commas and everything.
Yeah,
so
commas.
we're hitting the big stuff just and keeping it clean so that
they swapped out some words. They, maybe there was a capital letter on or a lowercase letter on the word buyer, and they made it an uppercase letter or uppercase B on buyer. So we're not hitting those little nuances, commas, and punctuation. So the first thing we'll talk about on the buyer listing agreement is under the buyer agent section 4.3.1.1, buyer agency unless brokerage relationship with both. And they added in a sentence that says the broker must disclose to such customer the broker's relationship with the buyer. We should be doing that anyway.
Should be doing that.
But just a modification. So Crystal's question.
I was gonna say, here's Crystal's.
Is under section 7.3. So as long as you're marking the checkbox, listing brokerage firm or seller may pay, buyer is obligated to pay. That's 7.3.1. Then in the event that the buyer chooses a for sale by owner that's not offering compensation or not offering full compensation, your commission can be charged to the buyer.
So yeah, no changes there, Crystal. Good question though.
Yeah. All right, so they reworked our default and cancellation paragraph again. Same thing as in the seller listing contract. If the broker's in default, if the buyer's in default. And then the last major change that they made was section 17 to the non-discrimination paragraph. This paragraph mirrored what was in the seller listing contract and stated that the buyer could not discriminate upon a protected class. And what the forms committee decided is a buyer has a really hard time discriminating against a protected class. You would typically see it on the seller side. A seller doesn't want to accept an offer because something is revealed about the buyer that is a protected class. It's real hard for the buyer to violate that. So they changed the wording in this listing agreement to state buyer understands and agrees that broker may not violate federal, state, and local fair housing laws. So if you have a buyer that approaches you and says, I want to live within a specific community, whether it's race, religion, marital status, gender, you cannot steer that buyer to or from a particular community. And that was the disclosure change that they made.
That does occur.
It does occur.
We do get calls once a year, twice a year from you saying, I have this buyer that's asking me to find him or her a specific area of individuals.
Yeah.
We show homes.
Can't do it.
We look for homes. We don't look for types of people that live in those homes. And so we can't be doing that. So
yeah, that's a great place to point the buyer back to and just say, hey, I can't violate federal, state, or local fair housing laws. And I can show you all the homes that meet your square footage, bedrooms and bathrooms, and price criteria. The new addition is section 23. No other party or intended beneficiaries. Nothing in this buyer listing contract is deemed to inure to the benefit of any person other than the buyer, the broker, and the brokerage firm.
I'm curious
I'm not sure what
something had to have occurred
came up that made them feel like this was something that needed to be added. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have a good story for you. Maybe by the time we teach the mandatory update, we'll have a story for you.
And that was it. Okay, so let's talk about a new form that we have, which I think is going to be really helpful. It's called the assignment of lease. So we saw really 2000, 2001, and even into this year, there were a lot of buyers that were having a hard time getting their hands on a home, and they were willing to purchase a property that had an existing tenant. And maybe there were 3-4 months left on the lease, and they wanted to occupy that home as a primary residence, but they said, we'll go ahead and buy it now, allow the tenant to live there through the expiration of the lease, and then we'll take over the property at that point. If you look in the contract to buy and sell under section 12.5, there's a paragraph called assignment of leases, and I'm actually going to read that to you. It says the seller must assign to buyer all leases at closing that will continue after closing, and buyer must assume seller's obligations under such leases. Furthermore, seller must transfer to buyer all leased items and assign to buyer such leases for leased items accepted by buyer. So in the contract to buy and sell, we were saying, hey, buyer and seller, you're going to assign the lease over to the new buyer, but there's no clause, there's no form, there's nothing that indicates how that is to be done. So what a lot of real estate agents in the industry were doing is wordsmithing their own clause, adding it to the additional provisions, or telling their seller to reach out to a real estate attorney and draft an assignment of lease form. Now Dora has created one for us. So what you do with this form, it's not something that you do at the time of execution of contract. This is actually a document you bring to the closing table because you don't want to assign any leases over until you physically have your proceeds in hand. So you put in the date of the assignment, which would be the closing date as you're all sitting around the closing table, the assigner, which is the landlord seller, the assignee, which is the buyer, the property address, the name of the tenant, the date of the lease, and the security deposit. And there's now nice language in there that states that the landlord is going to transfer all rights, titles, interest, security deposits over to that new buyer. So we don't have to draft any creative language, and we make sure that all the bases are covered. And then the buyer acknowledges that they accept and assume all of the landlord's obligations and liabilities under the lease with the tenant. The seller signs it, the buyer signs it, and then the seller notifies the tenant who the new owner of the property is.
So helpful.
Yes.
It's amazing we haven't had this prior to now.
I know.
Yeah. So this is.
So yeah, you no longer have to refer your clients to a real estate attorney. You can draft this document on their behalf. And again, not to sign prior to closing. Make sure you do that at the closing table.
And again, not for use until January 1st, 2023.
Yes. So if you already have a property that's under contract that has a lease that needs to be assigned, you got to do it the old school way with a real estate attorney. But this, as of January 1st, you can utilize. All right. So the seller's property disclosure had a total overhaul. And this is probably what we'll spend the majority of the remaining portion of the class covering. I do have the red line version up on the screen because there were so many changes that there was just no way we'd be able to convey this information without you guys seeing this red line version contract. So first things first, they did define the abbreviation SPD because that's what we all call it. Most of us don't say, hey, the seller's property disclosure. Hey, can you send me over a copy of the SPD? So they actually define that term in the very first paragraph, and they'll use that throughout this disclosure.
Yeah, it's kind of fun that they actually use it now.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yep, they do. All right. So the seller's property disclosure pertains to material defects affecting the property or the occupant. If the sales contract requires the seller complete this SPD, this form must be completed to the seller's current actual knowledge as of the date of the contract. Not as of the date that the seller's property disclosure was filled out, but as of the date of the contract to buy and sell that was received on the property.
So it needs to be as accurate and up to date as possible.
Yeah. And I think what they really wanted to relay with this is oftentimes sellers will fill out the property disclosure at the beginning of the listing. And we still advocate for that. It's a really lengthy process. So having them do it once it goes under contract isn't always the best. Take this when you do your listing agreement. But in the event that the property goes under contract with a buyer, there's an inspection that occurs, that transaction terminates, and you get a copy of that inspection report. You now need to update the seller's property disclosure for the new contract that comes in. So that's kind of the big takeaway.
I like that this next section says seller. We get so many questions from the sellers on how to fill this out. What should I, what shouldn't I? So here's an answer to the seller before it's even asked. Your answers are not limited to only the space provided in this SPD. Attach additional pages, reports, receipts, or any other documents you believe necessary for the information you provide to be complete. No, buyer and seller should review the advisory at the end of this SPD. So that's a great,
Yeah.
we want everything. Anything you know about this property that might be of consequence to the buyer, give it to us.
Yeah. And I think there were a lot of cases that were coming up with sellers saying, I didn't have room to put all the information in. And so they were claiming ignorance. Like, I knew the information, but I didn't have enough space in the comments to attach that. So now we're saying attach old inspection reports, attach any documents that you, the seller, or a property manager or the listing agent might have. We always say disclose, disclose, disclose. Nobody ever gets sued for over disclosing.
No.
Never.
And rarely do transactions fail to come together because someone disclosed. People appreciate information.
Yeah, they do. So they added in a line that allows the seller to note the year that the property was acquired so that you can determine the depth of knowledge that a seller should have about a property. Someone who owns a home for 4 months versus someone who owns a home for 10 years, they may fill out that seller's property disclosure a little differently. So that gives you a little bit of context to how much should they know and be putting down. So that's helpful. They also noted that anything that's mentioned in the seller's property disclosure doesn't necessarily determine whether an item's included or excluded in the purchase contract. So if someone says a washer dryer is in working condition, but it's not included in the contract to buy and sell, a buyer can't come back and say, but you said it was working, therefore I thought it was going to be in the property at closing.
That's good.
Yeah. So in section A, they made a fairly significant change of word. The wording was, or currently is in our current version, structural conditions. And they decided that building conditions felt a little more appropriate. And they added in that aspects of building conditions include decks and patios, because people were just thinking the structure of the house. And if there was a structural issue with a foundation, they would write it down. But if there was a structural issue with the integrity of a deck or a patio, they wouldn't put that down in the comment section.
And that helps agents, because I know in the past agents have said, well, that's not part of the foundation. It's not attached as a deck. It's, well, it might not be part of the foundation, but it's still something that you need to know and disclose. So yeah, that's a good change.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I'm going to highlight here, it wasn't changed in section A, but we're going to monitor it throughout the rest of this seller's property disclosure, is in black bold, ever existing. So the questions that follow in section A are ever existing. So in the event that this happened 10 years ago and the seller knows about it, they need to disclose it, not something that's currently existing.
We're not going to go through every little line that's been changed.
No, we'll put you guys to sleep if we go line by line. But there were a couple of check boxes that they added. For example, under roof, if the warranty is transferable, you can check yes or no. We can scroll down a little bit further to appliances, if included in the sale. I love that. If included in the sale, then you can go through and mark whether they're now in working condition or not. The other thing that is interesting, I'm going to have you scroll back up, that they have added in here, if you know of any potential problems or issues or concerns. So this one, actually, I do have a small backstory to this. This arose due to a broker owner selling their own property. And I believe it was a foundational issue. There was a crack in the foundation. They decided not to have a structural engineer come out and check it out. They've never had any reports pertaining to it, but the crack was really sizable and could be a potential problem. They didn't document it on the seller's property disclosure after closing. For whatever reason, buyers didn't do a home inspection. They found out that it compromised the structural integrity of the home, and they went after the owner, realtor, for not disclosing potential problems. I think that's a tricky one. I mean, we're not all experts in all areas of the home. I was just
going to say this expert, we'll see what happens down the road the next few years, if that is something that stays or goes, because I'm not an expert on cracks. I can't
tell you whether something's going to be a potential problem or not.
So if you don't disclose something that could have been a potential and you saw it, but you didn't think was potential, I don't know.
Yeah.
That just opens up a whole can of worms, but that's where we're at now for the seller.
For the seller. So make sure when you pass this disclosure along to your sellers that they are aware of if there's a potential problem, they should write it down. Again, disclose, disclose, disclose. These next couple of sections, they just reworked some of the section numbers and moved some of the disclosures around. So anything in green means it already existed somewhere else, and they're just pulling it into a different section. They added in solar panels, they added wind generators, they added in some other electrical stuff, whether the sellers have an internet provider, who the cable provider is, who the electric provider is, if there's landscape lighting, just a few additional questions that typically will come up along the transaction. I do like under the mechanical that they added in radon mitigation system, they added in sump pumps, and they added in recycling pump. So just a couple extra spots for the seller to notate things. And again, the seller's property disclosure, they try to do a really good job of jogging people's memories, because you may forget, oh yeah, we have a sump pump and it wasn't working, but we fixed it. By having that section, it helps trigger that for the seller. Ventilation and heating, they reworked a little bit in that section, moving things around, scratching a few things out. The water section just got reworked as well. They didn't delete or add anything specific. They just moved the section number.
And again, back to water. If you know of any potential problems, issues, or concerns ever existing with the following, check the yes.
Yeah.
Ever.
Ever.
Even if it was fixed.
So there's new places for well metered, cistern water, supplemental water that's been purchased in the last couple of years. Not much changed with the sewer section, other than they did add in some locations to write in who the sewer provider is, whether the line was recently scoped, and when. So that's kind of nice.
That's nice.
Because oftentimes that will come up when you go to do a home inspection. Hey, Mr. Seller, when was the last time that the line was scoped? And if they know, that would be really helpful. Dates of when the septic system was last inspected, that's really important. So another area that I really like is they have kind of cornered the building permit section. I know oftentimes when a buyer is looking at a property and they get the seller's property disclosure, maybe the basement's finished, and the buyer asks, hey, was the basement permitted? And you have to try and jump through all the hoops with the listing agent to figure out whether that's been done or not. And now we actually have locations to notate that information. So now under number 8, any additions or alterations made with a building permit. Perfect spot to put that the basement was finished. And then number 9, any additions or non-aesthetic alterations made without a building permit. The non-aesthetic, that's just so that if the seller just had the house repainted, they don't have to write down, we had the house painted, but it wasn't
carpeting.
permitted.
Do we need to? Yeah.
Yeah, those items do not have to be permitted, but you can note them, anything that was done. So another really good addition is whether the property is used for short-term rentals. So the question is, used for short-term rentals in the past year, or grandfathered conditions or uses. So any limitations on parking or access due to size, number of vehicles, or types of vehicles in the past year. That's another good addition.
That's a good one. Pretty basic.
Yeah, smoking inside. They did clarify, go ahead and move back just a little bit, that to include garages, unfinished space, or detached buildings.
That's
so
interesting.
Yeah.
I don't smoke in the house, but I go to the garage and then
Yep. So now that clarifies that. There is a new line item for odors. So in the event that you need to disclose an odor in the house. There's a few new things on the common interest community, so things located in an HOA. Again, keeping in mind things that have ever existed, not just currently existed. The nice thing is they added in a spot for us to be able to document, or the seller to be able to document the different HOAs. So oftentimes people live in communities that have multiple HOAs. And so now the seller's property disclosure notes who the HOA actually is. A place to note whether the property is subject to deed restrictions or affordable housing restrictions. Gosh, how many times do we run into that?
That's very helpful.
Yeah, it's so nice to be able to see that right off the bat. And then whether the property is located in a historic district, because there are certain things you can and can't do to properties in historic districts. And then the last one, under general, I think this is really cool. Location of mailbox and number. How many times do we go to closing, we forget to get that, and you're texting the other agent going, what's the mailbox number and where's it at?
So don't forget, Mr. Seller, you can attach to this so they can make a little map and they can draw which box and what area.
So yeah, definitely spend some time going through the red line version of this. Again, we hit just some of the highlights, but there were a lot of changes to this disclosure form. And a reminder to the seller, in the event seller discovers a new adverse material fact after completing this SPD, seller must disclose any such new adverse material fact to buyer. So that one really is in there for when during the under contract period, if something in the property breaks and the seller property disclosure's already been provided and the buyer's already signed it and you're 4 days from closing, Mr. Seller, you got to tell the buyer that the garage door opener broke.
Yeah, the hot water heater
went out,
leaked, and yes, it got on the floor and it all got cleaned up. It still has to be disclosed.
Exactly. So how are we looking on questions?
Not seeing anything. This is very helpful. Excellent. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions on the seller property disclosure, go ahead and type those in the comment section. I'm just going to breeze through these other 2 items that I want you guys to be aware of, and then we'll check back on those comments and we'll wrap up and get you on your way. So brokerage duties, disclosure to seller. This form had a couple of updates, but the main reason I wanted to bring this up is we are seeing some of you attach this addendum to your listing contracts. This addendum is only to be used in the event you're working with a large corporate seller or perhaps a bank that has had foreclosed properties that they've hired you to be the realtor on the listing side, and they have real estate attorneys that draft their own listing agreements. So if you're using a regular Colorado approved form, just disregard this addendum completely. If you're working with a bank or a big corporate seller and they say, don't worry about drafting a listing agreement, we're going to have our attorney send you ours, then you have to attach this addendum because it outlines the Colorado specific disclosures and our uniform duties per Colorado law. Otherwise, do not ever use that form.
Or a builder. If you represent a builder and that person has their own listing contract. Yeah,
Lennar or DR Horton.
Or some small mom and pop that had their own attorney. You've got to have that because, as Stacey said, you have to have the uniform duties. Those are required, can never be gotten around.
Yep, exactly. And then the licensee buyout addendum had just a couple clerical modifications to match the CBS. This form, I just wanted to remind you, is not the form that you use in the event that you're going to buy your own listing. Sometimes you guys will put listings on the market and 2 weeks down the road, you go, I actually would really like to buy this house myself. This is not a document that you need to use. This is only in the event that you are running a business model where you tell your sellers at the time of listing, in the event that I don't sell your home within the first 30 days, I agree to buy it myself to continue to market and find a buyer for it.
I don't know of anyone in our office that does that.
I don't either.
If you do, please talk to us. Make sure we're doing it the right way. But again, it's not you buying your listing. It's you predetermining what you would buy that for in the event that you couldn't sell it for the person.
Couldn't sell it.
So there's a lot more going on there than you just negotiating a deal after you fell in love with your own listing, which happens.
It does happen. It does happen. So those were just 2 forms that we're seeing used occasionally in scenarios that they don't need to be used. And I thought now would be a really good time to bring you guys all up to speed on those. So.
All right.
that is our bird's eye view of the contract changes. Let's take a quick look and see if there were
I'm
any
not seeing
additional
any questions.
And again, like you said, we're going to see these pop back up for the mandatory update come next year. So we'll probably have some more stories and some more context into why some of these items were changed. But at least, you know, as the year winds down and you have to draft these buyer agencies and seller listing contracts come January 1st, you're going to have some good knowledge and confidence in moving forward.
Well, great. With that, we're just excited to see you guys this Friday.
This Friday.
So yeah, fall
holiday party,
open
house style. Stop by anytime between 4:30 and 7. Stay for the
main
whole
office.
thing.
Yeah, food.
Yeah, food,
entertainment,
drink.
kind of us.
Well,
we got things going on.
Yeah.
Games.
Come share some food and beverages.
Just
with
looking forward to seeing
Todd,
you guys.
Stacy, Paul, Brianna of Own Home Loans. We're excited to see all of you.
So great. No questions. Appreciate you guys, and see you in a few days.
All right. Take
Have
care.
a great rest of your week. See ya.